It includes 6 other young girls within a very short time.
Ranging in age from 12 to 20, those listening to Tituba's stories included Ann Putnam Jr., Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, Elizabeth Booth, Mercy Lewis, and Mary Warren. The lurid tale stirred excitement but also guilt in the young Puritans. They began to act in strange and aberrant ways.
They fell into these fits. They had certain kinds of trance experiences. They felt prickled with pins and cut with knives. They were tempted to throw themselves into the fire, to commit suicide. They couldn't. They had to stop their ears when the minister preached the word of God. They couldn't listen to it.
They're screaming. They're crying out. They are throwing things about the room. This sort of behavior is not the behavior of young Christian girls. It's certainly not in a Puritan community.
Alarmed, the Reverend Parris called in the village physician, Dr. William Griggs, who found no physical symptoms to explain their unusual behavior and concluded that the cause must be spiritual. He declared the girls were under the evil hand of witchcraft. Given the Puritan belief in witches, the diagnosis was readily accepted.
Puritans believed that witches could, in fact, seduce or tempt people to become witches themselves. And so they saw this behavior, these convulsions, this stuff, as a reaction against the witch. In other words, the idea was these young people were perceived as struggling not to become witches themselves.
Parris began to question the girls relentlessly to identify the witch who had afflicted them. Finally, Elizabeth and Abigail named Tituba, who lived with them and had regaled the girls with her stories and magic.
With her status as a slave, she's an obvious choice to be accused of witchcraft. She has absolutely no one who's going to stand up for her.
But it did not end there. Next, the girls accused Sarah Good, the town beggar. Sarah Good's stooped and wrinkled appearance, her irascible temper, and her low status in the village made her an easy target. And then another accusation, Sarah Osborne, an old and bedridden Salem villager. Already a marked woman, she was scorned for marrying her indentured servant, John Osborne. She also shared one noticeable trait with accused witch Sarah Good. Neither of them attended church. On March 1st, 1692, the 3 women were brought before an informal tribunal in the meeting house of Salem Village in order to establish whether there was any evidence of witchcraft. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin presided.
You don't have the layer of interplay between lawyers that you have today as opposed to in 1692. It seemed to be much more just straight depositions from those accusing someone of a crime of some sort, in this case witchcraft, and the accused trying to defend themselves when being verbally examined in the court by the judges.
The magistrates' decisions on the kinds of evidence allowed in this informal proceeding also played an important role in the trials to come.
The whole purpose of the pre-trial examination was to determine, on the part of the court, if there was sufficient evidence, serious evidence, weighty evidence, admissible evidence, perhaps submitted by more than 2 people, that this individual was in fact a likely suspect, that there was enough evidence that we might proceed and have a trial.
Suddenly in Salem, magistrates and ministers who are advising them are willing to accept kinds of evidence that they would have considered unacceptable in most other witchcraft proceedings that we know of in New England.
Perhaps the most damaging decision of all was to allow spectral evidence.
Spectral evidence in 1692 was evidence that the accused appeared to the persons being tormented in the form of a specter. Sometimes it would take the shape of a bird, or sometimes it would be the specter of the person. But it would not be the actual person who would be accused of hitting or pinching or biting someone being tormented. It would be their specter that was doing it. And so the specter is evident only to the person making the accusation. The specter's not evident to the person who's being accused. It's not evident to the spectators in the court. It's not evident to the judges. It's only evident to the person making the accusation.
The preliminary hearing began with the interrogation of Sarah Good. In a deposition taken a few days before the hearing, Ann Putnam Jr. swore that the specter of Sarah Good had tried to enlist her as a witch by getting her to sign the Devil's Book.
I saw the apparition of Sarah Good, which did torture me grievously. She did prick me and pinch me most grievously, and also since, several times urging me vehemently to write in her book.
Several of the other girls confirmed Ann's accusations. Magistrate John Hathorne questioned Sarah Good, who repeatedly denied being a witch.
Sarah Good, what evil spirit have you familiarity with?
None.
Have you made no contract with the devil?
No.
Why do you hurt these children?
I do not hurt them. I scorn it.
Who do you employ then to do it?
I employ nobody.
What creature do you employ then?
No creature. But I am falsely accused.
Each denial was met with convulsive fits and unearthly screams from the afflicted girls, who claimed that Sarah Good's specter had attacked them in the courtroom. This was perceived as strong evidence of her guilt. Sarah Osborne's questioning was met with the same histrionics from the girls. But it would be the testimony of the third accused woman, Tituba, that would change the course of the trials.
She immediately confesses to witchcraft. I think it's fairly clear from her examination. I think she's simply going to tell these officials whatever it is that she thinks they want to hear.
Finally, after who knows how long amount of questions and badgering, she finally says, "The devil came to me and bid me serve him."
For 3 days, Tituba spun elaborate tales about talking animals, night flights on broomsticks, and spectral visits intended to harm the children. Most significantly, she testified that a mysterious tall man from Boston bade her to sign the Devil's Book in blood. When Tituba was asked how many names were in the book, she replied 9, her own, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne's, and 6 others that she could not see. This statement sent a shiver through the crowd in the meeting house. It meant there were other witches in the hallowed community of Salem. The confession of Tituba the slave to the charges of witchcraft rocked Salem in March 1692. Her statement that 9 people had signed the Devil's Book was a Puritan Pandora's box. The paranoia that ensued set neighbor against neighbor in the small community.
We have this traitor to God's community living in our midst. And the question, of course, would be, how many others? If she could live with a minister and his wife and family, how many others of this kind might there be in this community? And that is the great fear.
It seems like there's just witches everywhere, and you're thinking, well, that woman who lives down the road that we've never liked terribly much. I mean, she does seem a little odd. Is she a witch?
In this poisoned atmosphere, the accusations of witchcraft began to spread. But there was a marked difference in the new wave of accusations. The first accused women had been of low status in the village. Those who followed were upstanding members of the community. For example, matronly Rebecca Nurse hardly fit the image of a witch.
She was an elderly woman. She was 70 or 71, rather infirm and very deaf. When she was accused of witchcraft, I think that must have sent a few shudders through the community, because she is not an obvious person to be accused of witchcraft.
Rebecca Nurse's reaction to her accusation was typical of the guilt-ridden Puritan mentality. When asked if she was guilty of the crime of witchcraft, Nurse replied,
As to this thing, I am innocent as the child unborn. But surely what sin has God found in me unrepented of, that he would lay such an affliction on me in my old age?
The arrest of Rebecca Nurse reflected a pronounced split in Salem. In fact, most of those who supported Nurse lived in the East, held more liberal views, and were more prosperous than their neighbors. In general, the accusers were poor farmers of lower status and lived in the western part of the village. 39 people signed a petition attesting to Rebecca Nurse's moral character.
When you signed a petition for someone who'd been accused of witchcraft, you're putting your own neck on the line to a certain extent, because you didn't know when accusations might be start being made against you.
By spring 1692, the number of accusations escalated. More than 100 men and women from Salem to Boston were arrested. Even relatives of the accused witches became targets. The youngest, 4-year-old Dorcas Good, the daughter of Sarah Good.
They actually had to make a special set of chains for her. She was so small that her arms and feet, of course, just slid right out of the normal-sized chains that were used to chain people up.
It is widely believed that Dorcas confessed in order to be with her mother in prison. Both of Rebecca Nurse's sisters, Mary Easty and Sarah Town Cloyce, soon joined her in jail. Just about anybody who spoke out against the proceedings was immediately suspect. Even Reverend George Burroughs, the former minister of Salem Village, who lived in Maine, was held for trial. As the ranks of the accused continued to swell, it became clear that something needed to be done about the situation in Salem. The witch hunt formally moved from a series of inquiries, statements, and depositions against suspected witches to an official trial. On June 2, 1692, Massachusetts Governor William Phips officially convened the Court of Oyer and Terminer at Salem. Translated as to hear and determine, the court, made up of 7 judges and 12 jurors, was presided over by the Deputy Governor of Massachusetts, William Stoughton. The first person called before the court, a woman named Bridget Bishop.
She was a property owner. She had been married several times. She was very prominent in her business activities. She was independent, a very independent thinker.
But the biggest strike against Bridget Bishop was that she had been accused of witchcraft in the past.
Samuel Willard, a Puritan minister, says that there is no crime or aspersion that is with more difficulty wiped off than an accusation of witchcraft. So I think any woman accused of witchcraft would have known that word being used against her was going to have enduring force.
The court found Bridget Bishop guilty. Tried on June 2nd, she was hanged 8 days later at Gallows Hill in Salem, the first victim of the witch trials. The trials were largely a repetition of the preliminary hearings of March and April 1692. The testimony as well as the spectral evidence gathered during the proceedings were accepted as fact by the judges. As news of the event spread throughout New England, the girls continued to react to the testimony in increasingly dramatic ways.
If the accused moved a certain way, if they moved their head a certain way, the girls immediately, all their heads would move the same way. If they threw up their hands or rolled their eyeballs, the same thing with the girls would throw up their hands and roll their eyeballs. And so the pressure is on, finally, for these people to essentially confess to witchcraft, because, of course, the minute they do that, the girls are fine.
Ironically, a confession of witchcraft was the one sure way to survive the trials. In Puritan society, a confession put a person in the hands of God. It was up to the Lord to forgive sins and cleanse the unrighteous. 55 of the approximately 200 accused took this way out. But the girls showed no sign of ending their finger-pointing. In fact, they began to spread their accusations beyond the confines of Salem to Gloucester, Beverly, Lynn, Malden, Amesbury, Billerica, Marblehead, Boston, Charlestown, and Andover.
I think their accusations are also fed as the trials move forward by the unexpected attention that's paid to them. They're in a position suddenly that's very unusual for young women to be in Puritan society, which is they're the public testifiers. All of a sudden, the preachers and the magistrates are the listeners, and the young women are the speakers. It's absolutely unprecedented. Their words are being reported up and down the colonies as far away as London. I mean, these women are rock star famous in their own time.
Unchecked by the authorities, the words of the girls sent more and more people to their deaths. On July 19, 1692, 5 women, including Sarah Good and Rebecca Nurse, were hanged. Sarah cursed Judge Nicholas Noyes as she was led to her death.
I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink.
Sarah's curse may have come true. 25 years later, as Noyes lay dying, he apparently choked on his own blood. On August 9th, 5 more people, including Reverend George Burroughs, were put to death on Gallows Hill.
Reverend George Burroughs stood straight as an arrow, faced his accusers, and, as many people are aware, recited the Lord's Prayer from beginning to end, letter perfect.
Witches were supposed to be unable to say the prayer properly. Burroughs' final act may have planted a seed of doubt in the minds of Salem's residents. Nevertheless, on September 22nd, another 8 people